Awesome. Hi, everyone. We're so grateful you're here for our webinar about vulnerability management, network penetration testing, and governance risk compliance. Our speaker today is Aaron Woods. He is our security manager here at Dynamic Quest. He takes great pride when it comes to cybersecurity and how to best protect organizations from threats. And he is constantly working to bring the best new tools for our clients and prospects so that they can feel secure. So with that being said, Aaron, take it away.
Thanks, Hannah, for the introduction. Hope everybody's doing well, and thanks for joining on a wonderful Thursday during lunch. I will try to keep the presentation to around 30 minutes, and then I will answer any questions afterwards.
And just to chime in, sorry, we have the Q&A feature here. So if you go to the top of your screen and click on Q&A, if you have any questions throughout any of the presentation, please add them to the Q&A and Aaron will chime in on those as well.
Alrighty, so today's presentation is to go over vulnerability management, network pen testing, and governance risk and compliance. These are new services, especially on the penetration testing and the governance risk and compliance that I have put in place here at Dynamic Quest. These actually, we went live with them a little over a week ago. So I will be discussing those. So the agenda is: what is layered security, what is governance risk and compliance, network pen testing, vulnerability management, and questions. So to start the presentation off, here is a layered security approach that we take wholeheartedly. Industry standards, and you probably see a lot of these regarding when you're doing cyber insurance renewals, things of that nature. But if you're already a client of Dynamic Quest on one of our two IT management plans, you already have what is in dark blue on the left side. So you already have malware detection and prevention, email defense, spam filtering, DNS content filtering to filter out malicious websites, dark web monitoring to monitor your email address if it's been part of any third-party breach, and security awareness training with phishing simulation. On the right side in the green is, if any of you were part of the webinar that I did months back, but the first one at the top is SIMSOC. So that is 24/7, 365 cybersecurity monitoring with log collection to actually analyze for any threats coming from firewalls, endpoints, and cloud, Office 365, Azure. Then you've got unified threat management, typically is dealing with firewalls with added services to them like intrusion detection, things of that nature, backup disaster recovery. And then we get down to penetration vulnerability scans, and then governance risk and compliance and mobile device management. So to start off, what is GRC? So GRC stands for governance risk and compliance. Governance is basically the set of policies and rules or frameworks that you as an organization follow internally. So those are what is put in place, from policies and procedures that are in place, incident responses, policies, anything of that sense. Risk management involves identifying your critical assets and identifying the risks of those assets in case if something were to happen to them. How can they damage the business? What's the biggest risk for the organization? And then the compliance piece of it is basically, if you're an organization such as healthcare, or you deal with government for like a DoD subcontractor, anything like that, where you have to follow regulations that are enforced by higher up laws, then you must do certain things to actually meet those compliance needs. So the benefits of governance, risk, and compliance is it reduces risk And the reason it reduces risk because everything is documented and people have something to follow. So whenever anything changes in an IT infrastructure or the security organization, or how you were to react to an incident response or an incident through a response, all of those things should be documented as policies, but you should also have controls in place to actually show those policies being met. It enhances the security by doing those things as well. You contain costs because doing it manually internally or hiring a compliance officer internally to be able to do those things, it's a lot of work to build your own spreadsheets, to build your own policies and things of that nature. And then with our GRC platform, it's a full-blown platform that covers over 20 standards and frameworks, to where you can select the standard that you want to meet, and it lays out all of the controls. You have the ability to actually upload your proof of those controls being met into the platform, to where when you have a third-party auditor come in, you can deliver those and show that these things are being done. It can help you measure compliance against regulations and accept standards, also known as doing a gap analysis. So basically, a gap analysis is when I do policies and procedures and I analyze all of my assets, what controls am I not able to meet? So I need to analyze what the gap is and actually have a process in place, or what we call a POAM, which is a plan of action and milestones spreadsheet that actually shows the gaps and what's the tentative dates for those gaps to be mitigated and what's the actual target date for them to be done. Manage and document compliance with any set of IT security requirements or controls. So we actually have the ability for organizations that have certain things that they do internally that wouldn't fall necessarily in a framework like NIST or CMMC or HIPAA that they do internally. We can actually help build those frameworks within the tool set. Shield your organization against business interruptions, compliance violation, fines, lawsuits, or monetary loss. Keep pace with organizational changes and expansion. So anytime you grow as an organization, whether it be acquisition or just growing organically, that involves the IT and the infrastructure to grow with the organization. So actually being able to document and analyze things being changed in the environment, what certain things do, so it can all be laid out on paper, and create accurate compliance documentation. So most of the industry standards are listed in here. We've got, CIS control. CMMC deals with government. The cyber insurance readiness is actually a good one for really any organization to fall. It actually goes through all of the controls and everything that a cyber insurance agency would actually look at. When you do renewals for cyber insurance, you're basically checking a box that you're actually doing these things. What people don't understand is that if you ever file a claim, that immediately gives the insurance company a right to come back and actually do an audit. So they're paying out money. They have the right to come in and do an audit that says, show me proof that you are doing these things and show me the controls that you have in place, proof of those controls. HIPAA, that's a big one if you're a healthcare environment, to actually follow those controls. NIST 800-171, a lot of people build their security controls off of NIST. It's a great framework to use. It covers a lot of different things. It's over 108 controls that must be met to be fully compliant. The cybersecurity framework from NIST is a really good one. And if you take credit cards and you're under PCI regulations for DSS, then you already have to do those things as well. So some example of standards and controls. So right here, this is part of a cyber insurance readiness, cyber liability standard. So I just listed a couple of different controls that must be met for each of these standards. So backup and recovery, one of the controls is, are you doing a full recovery from backup? Is it tested every year? Business continuity, the applicant has a written business continuity plan. Compliance, is the applicant currently compliant or able to demonstrate a defensible compliance? Which means exactly what I just said. If somebody walks in and says, okay, you just did a claim, now we want to audit, can you actually defend that you check the box that you are compliant as an organization? Data protection, software installation is controlled and unauthorized software is blocked. And then training, phishing simulations are conducted for all employees every month. Written policies, does the applicant have written information security policies in place? So if we look at like one for NIST cybersecurity framework, you see all these different controls that are all red. These would all be green if these things were actually being met, and the proof is actually inserted into the platform to actually show proof of those controls to where they can be marked off. Things such as in HIPAA, you have to monitor logins. You've got to audit controls. And then on the NIST cybersecurity framework, are you monitoring personnel? These are just some of the examples of different controls that need to be met. So what's the workflow of the entire platform that we offer? The workflow is you pick your standard or your internal requirement, you generate the policy and procedure manual, you run a baseline assessment of the organization, you perform a full technical assessment and controls assessment. So we actually offer agents that can actually automate some of the proof of controls that go back to some of the things that need to be met, like do you have a password policy enforced? Well, that's usually done within Active Directory. So our tools can actually pull that information automatically and link it back to the control and actually show the proof that that's being done. Review the automatically generated risk reports. You create a plan of action and milestones on any gaps and when those gaps will be mitigated. You then upload your supplementary evidence compliance, implement security awareness training, manage your vendor risk, and then you rinse and repeat the process. Compliance, governance, risk, and compliance is not a one and done deal. This is the reason why we offer this service as a monthly engagement, because it is an ongoing. It will never, you can never stop doing it. Things change too much. People quit the organization, key people move, all sorts of different things play into this. So everything should be kept up to date. So anytime there's an audit, you can show proof that things are being met. And if y'all are posting in the Q&A, this is on full screen. So I will actually glance over those when I'm actually done with the presentation, and I'll be able to actually answer any of those questions. So moving on from governance risk over to penetration testing and vulnerability scans. What are they? Well, vulnerability scanning, they kind of overlap in some instance. So a good way to look at vulnerability scanning, if you were to hire somebody to come out to your house and assess the outside of your house. So part of that assessment, they would count how many windows you had, how many doors you had. Basically, that's what vulnerability scanning is doing. It's basically analyzing and coming back with anything that has an open port and what might be vulnerable to that open port. Penetration testing takes it a step further. As part of the assessment and the testing, it does vulnerability lookups as well, but then when it finds vulnerabilities, it will actually try to exploit those vulnerabilities. So it will show you what an attacker at any given point in the organization could gain access to. And then you can build with governance risk compliance. You run this, and now you can come up with a risk plan on what the risk is to what the penetration test found, and then you mitigate those. So vulnerability scanning discovers vulnerabilities. It assesses the vulnerabilities by severity, whether they're low to critical. It prioritizes them, mitigation strategy, the validates remediation worked, and rinse and repeat. So we offer this as a monthly engagement because, again, things in IT change. You roll out new workstations every month. You know, things are changed in the environment. So being able to look at vulnerability scanning on a monthly basis and then remediate those things. This is something, again, cyber insurance, it's another checkbox. Penetration testing. So with what vulnerability scanning is doing, we're actually doing open source intelligence gathering. So gathering intelligence from the organization, whether that be the public domain name of your organization. Then we discovered the hosts on the network. The enumeration, but taking all that evidence and collection, then we find the vulnerabilities and we try to exploit them. If they're able to be exploited through, then we will do a post exploitation, meaning that, let's say if we find a critical port that's open that's got a critical vulnerability, and that server or whatnot might have credentials that can be attacked, and we're able to access data, then we will show a test that that data can be exfiltrated. The report usually consists of, for an internal penetration test, it's usually between 80 and 90 page report that shows all the evidence of the findings, different commands and scripts that were ran to actually produce those findings. And then we also offer remediation for what has been found. Our penetration on the vulnerability side, we do it every 12 months. Every month. And then on the penetration testing, we do it semi-annual. A lot of companies, penetration testing usually do it once a year. But when I look at that, I think, okay, there's too many gaps that happen for the other 11 months out of the year. If you're only doing it once, then what about the other 11 months that something goes unnoticed? So by offering the vulnerability scanning monthly, we're able to see all the vulnerabilities month over month and the trend from what's being remediated and what's not. But then on the semi-annual penetration testing, we run it, we produce the report, we go over the report with you. We then come up with a mitigation plan, mitigate, then we will run it again. So if a third-party auditor comes in, you can actually show this is the before, this is the after, all done in the same year. A lot of value to it. Some of the stats from vulnerability stats. So I went through and pulled a number of stats. So number of common IT security vulnerabilities and exposures worldwide from 2009 to April 2023. You can see that in 2022 alone, there were over 25,227 new vulnerabilities found, whether it be through, web applications, through Microsoft on Windows, different operating systems, even third-party tools that people use. And then 2023 up to April, there's already been 7,489 new vulnerabilities found. Threat actors are always poking and always figuring out ways. And there's a lot of people that are on teams that actually, like big organizations like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, that actually pay bounties to companies to find new vulnerabilities. High-risk vulnerabilities are present on the network perimeters of 84% of companies. This is a study done from Positive Technologies that the statistics for high exploit vulnerabilities that are available is 58% of the vulnerabilities found. That's crazy, because the ones that are very high and critical, that have exploits available, it's just it's not if, it's just when a company gets attacked. Half of internet-facing web application vulnerabilities are considered high risk. That's crazy, because now with the digital world we live in, everything's public. Um, um, One of the ones in here, everybody talks about, going to the cloud, but I have on the next one about, back in 2020, Microsoft, um, the first vulnerability associated with Azure. So it happens no matter where you're at. So being able to actually know you have vulnerabilities, that's the biggest key. The oldest vulnerability discovered in 2020 was 21 years old. And the thing about it is when this was taken, I can say from today, present time today, it would be 24 years old, because this vulnerability still exists. More than 28,500 WordPress vulnerabilities have been detected over the past 8 years. Well, probably most of y'all that are joining this call, y'all's website probably run off WordPress. So that's crazy. It's very high. The first critical vulnerabilities in a major cloud infrastructure were found in January. So this goes back to Checkpoint doing this for Azure infrastructure. So again, anything with an IP address, Internet of Thing devices, meaning like the smart thermostat you have in your house, to Amazon Alexa, to all of this stuff, all are susceptible to vulnerabilities and intrusions. 75% of attacks in 2020 used vulnerabilities that were at least 2 years old. So again, this comes from not knowing you have vulnerabilities, because you're not doing vulnerability scanning on a monthly basis. So if you don't know you're exposed, how can you even fix those things? Penetration testing and vulnerability scans. We offer 2 unique testing services to guide your organization to a stronger security posture. Again, I've kind of already talked about this, but monthly internal and external scans. The internal scans are really key, because most of the breaches that are happening today come from inside out attacks, meaning that somebody clicks on something that allows a threat actor to gain a foothold on their endpoint. And then based on vulnerabilities that exist internally in the network, they're able to, laterally move through the network and use those vulnerabilities to their benefit. And then biannual penetration testings. They go deeper than the vulnerability scans. As I've discussed, we replicate the attack methods of malicious hackers by exploiting security weaknesses found during these vulnerability assessments. In-depth security scans create reports. We identify the risks. We identify where your organization stands, and then we will work with you to actually remediate those issues. Penetration tests, our scans include egress filtering testing. So basically that's what I was saying when I said that if we find something like we're able to actually gain access to sensitive data, we will then show proof that the data can be exfiltrated. We won't actually exfiltrate the data, but we will show proof that the data, that we were able to lay our hands on it. And at that point, if we can touch it, we can definitely send it to wherever we want. Privilege escalation and lateral movement. Again, if we can find passwords or brute force attempt and actually break hashes in the organization, we will then try to take those hashes, turn them into clear text passwords, use those passwords to see if we can take a normal account and escalate the privilege to now make it an administrator on the network. Simulated malware. So with elevated access, if we're actually able to gain elevated access, This is one where we're actually able to test the controls of the organization when it comes to endpoint detection. So the antivirus that's installed, if we are able to simulate a malware incident, will the endpoint detection be able to stop it? Timely reporting. Most, when you do a external penetration test, it can take weeks, if not months, to deliver the port. We can actually, once the scans ran within a couple of weeks, we can actually deliver a report within 3 business days. Authentication attacks. After the discovery of user account credentials, the scan will attempt to validate those credentials and determine why they are most useful or where they are most useful. So again, those credentials could be to a file server that's got sensitive data on it. It could be to your medical on-premise EHR applications, things of that nature, anything critical to the organization. And then again, we will try to exfiltrate that data if we can, or show proof of the data can be exfiltrated. So the benefits of monthly and biannual penetration scans, we're actually able to do it at a reasonable cost for the small and SMB market. The results available at your fingertips. Again, the good thing about our penetration testing and vulnerability scans is you actually have access to a platform to where you can actually pull the reports and actually see a timeline on the penetration test, what the timeline is for that test to be completed, and when the reports are released, and be able to gain access to those reports. So just a couple of screenshots on kind of what it looks like, vulnerability. This is a view of the vulnerability. This is a week over week report. So basically this just goes through, and week over week, this would actually show a trend. So maybe on like June 19th at the bottom, you start with 1, you break it down by severity, but then all of a sudden, maybe July 10th, that number jumps up or the number drops. You obviously want to see a down arrow, because that means that things are actually being remediated and no new vulnerabilities were found. Some of the vulnerabilities, consist of end-of-life operating systems. Those are vulnerable just because they can't be patched anymore. So any new vulnerabilities that come out, you can't really protect them. The only way to protect devices that are end of life is actually segment them on a network and lock them down to where only key assets can actually gain access to them. But then again, it's not fully mitigated, because you're still providing access. Things like OpenSSH, which usually you find on networking equipment, like switches, firewalls, things of that nature. SSL TLS, that comes with encryption, so that could be on a website, anything with an HTTPS address. It can even be on printers. So if you have a vulnerability, a penetration test, so you can actually see the timeline, you would actually have access to a dashboard that looks just like this. Going through the phase on, check the box on when this timeline is actually being completed. It actually goes through a full-blown 2-day Q&A process to make sure everything is accurate before the report's ever released. And I kind of break down what each of these things mean. So open source intelligence, again, it's just using the information gathered from public internet sources to lay out an attack surface for the organization. I know there's always a lot of questions from people on how did that threat actor know my personal email address when they sent these phishing emails? Well, threat actors have tools that they use, just like me as a security person. I use open source intelligence tools as well, to where I can scan a domain name of any organization and I can tell you if they're active on LinkedIn. It will pull email addresses that might be publicly exposed with their website, on LinkedIn, on social media. This is how threat actors gain access and know things about the organization. social media is key, but I will say until the day I go in my grave, social media has created a cybersecurity nightmare. Host discovery, performing discovery of systems and services within the environment targeted and including active systems and port scanning. So basically, again, that's part of the vulnerability part that the pen testing is doing, is just gathering that discovery on what assets it's able to see on the network. And then it goes into enumeration. So it will gather the services and identify any potential or valuable information and complete the vulnerability analysis. Then we move into the exploitation. We use information that's gathered from open source intelligence and the host discovery and the top three, and then we start launching attacks against those services. And then once those attacks are launched, depending on what was found, we will try to see if they're exploitable and then see if any sensitive data can be gathered to where it could be exfiltrated. And hopefully that was very informative. So I'm gonna actually cut this out so I can actually open up the Q&A here and see what we have. Hannah, I don't have anything in
I
the
see
Q&A.
there's a new one in as well.
Okay, so Mark, thanks for that question. So who's providing the pen testing reports? I'm glad that question has been asked. So we actually partner with a security company, Vonahai Security. They're out of Atlanta. They automate and do all of these the penetration testing. So what I do on my side is I will set up a Linux box that has a lot of different tools that threat actors actually use and a lot of pen testers use. Those tools are then automated and ran by Vonahai Security. It all goes through their part of the Q&A process. It goes through their team to actually analyze what was found, make sure everything's accurate, and then the reports are generated. And then me and my team on the security side will actually go over the report with the organization, analyze the findings, and then we will offer up a remediation plan and then work on the remediation, and then we will schedule another scan to be done. So
Great.
these are third-party assessed reports. And that is key because it has to be done that way in order to meet a lot of compliance. Again, me and my security team is kind of separate from the normal day-to-day IT stuff of what Dynamic Quest does as a managed service provider. But again, still being under the same umbrella, in order to meet some compliance needs, it has to be done by a third party. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Pop them into the Q&A, or
Yeah.
I can unmute your mics and you can speak them if that's more comfortable for you.
Yeah, if you wanna unmute
Yes.
Hannah, that might be a lot better.
Okay.
And Don, you got a question? Will we get a copy of the presentation? Yes. So this is being recorded, so Hannah can distribute that out.
That will be sent hopefully tomorrow. And mics have been able to unmute now if they want to chat, whatever's best.
Thanks for that question, Harold. So what would be the time frame for getting a client compliant with the framework such as CMMC 2.0? CMMC 2.0 is very in depth because again, it deals with it deals with the federal government. So what is ever easy when you deal with the federal government? There is a lot of controls and things in place that have to be met as far as the framework goes, and being able to go through each control. That can be done within 1 and 2 months, but actually, if there's any gaps on things that actually have to be done, I've seen CMMC audits go from 6 months to a year to actually be able to meet compliance needs. And it also depends on what level you're doing. If it's level 1, there's not as many as controls, but when you start getting into level 2 and level 3, there's a lot of things that have to be met. Anybody else got any more questions? Man, y'all are making it easy for me today.
There's another question. Is pen testing a part of an organization DQ bill or additional?
No, we bundle the vulnerability and pen testing into a single offering. So that is an additional, because that falls out of day-to-day IT needs. That's on the security side. So we actually offer that as a separate service. Just how we do with 24/7, 365, the SimSOC service. That is on as well, and so would be the governance, risk, and compliance piece. Yes, it would be built. It would be built through Dynamic Quest. You're correct, Allison. Yes. Sorry, I missed that.
How does the pen vulnerability testing DQ does differentiate from other providers?
That's a good question too. So as I was reviewing a way that, Dynamic Quest as a company from a security aspect, be able to offer affordable penetration testing and vulnerability scan to what other security companies offer. I was really surprised because I work with a lot of different third-party security companies. If you're in the credit union world, you know of Trace Securities because they're one of the main ones used by credit unions. But there's a lot of others. And when I actually analyze the report and put it against one of them, it's apples to apples. When you're talking about doing network penetration testing, which is what this is. Now, there's all sorts of different penetration tests, all the way from internal and network penetration testings for internal and external. Those are mainly what any auditor and cyber insurance and any of those are actually looking for. But you could do penetration tests for mobile applications, for cloud services like Azure and things of that, application pen testing. Those are different. But on the network, it's apples to apples. And actually, as part of this, to make it even better, I actually have a full-blown 82-page sample report for an internal pen testing report that I can actually have Hannah or any of the AEs that are on this call from Dynamic Quest actually send each and every one of you that join this meeting, so you can see what a real report looks like.
Great. Any other questions out there? All right, if not, we will close the webinar. You can always reach out to Erin or anyone on our team. We're always happy to reach out and answer your questions. This recording will be sent to you as well as the slides, hopefully tomorrow. And if you have any questions before then, reach out. Thanks for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody, for taking your time during your lunch to join us. I appreciate it.